today's topic is reflecting on 2023 trends to improve on volunteer programs for 2024. So myself, my name is Gung Wong. It's not super phonetic, but it's like gung ho if that's easier to remember. And so I'm the CEO and co-founder here at Civic Champs. We're a volunteer management platform for those of you that might be less familiar with us. And then, yeah, Hunter, if you want to do a quick intro.
Yeah, thanks. I'm Hunter Williams, one of the partners at Little Green Light. Been working here since 2011 or 2010, actually. Very excited to be working with Gung and the Civic Champs team. We've been talking for over a year, but working on an integration now really actively for about the last 6 months, and really excited about bringing the two services together here.
Yeah. No, and then, so the first thing we thought we would do is actually ask you all a little bit about yourselves and your organizations. So I've never tried to do a poll here, so you have to excuse me as I try to find that, but I think I found it. So volunteers, let's see if I think I got it. Does everyone see the poll? Yeah, so there's just 3 questions here. This will help us just get an understanding of everyone that's here on the webinar today. So letting us know how many volunteers do you have, give us a rough estimate. And then, do you have more or less volunteers today versus pre-COVID? And then in the year over year, did you have more or less in 2022 or 23? And if you're unsure, right, just give us your best guess. But this will give us a sense of where everyone's at today, right? And so this is actually kind of fun. I can see the poll moving here. So we have most folks have participated already. We got a few more folks, so I'll give them some time. A wide range on the number of volunteers thus far, it looks like. Then, all right. I think, yeah. Give folks maybe another 10 seconds or so. Oh, one last participant remaining. Can we get them? 27 of 28. Could be that they're all right. I think I'll end the poll here. 96% reporting in. I feel like it's a caucus. Right? We're on like a news channel. So I think everyone can see the results, but let me know if you can't. It looks like we have a pretty wide range of how many volunteers folks have, with sort of the most number here at 11 to 50, but all the way up to 1,000 plus. And then in terms of volunteers before or after COVID, majority of folks actually feel like they have more volunteers today than they had pre-COVID, but pretty close to 50-50. And then clearly had more volunteers in 2023 than 2022. So that's exciting and something I think we anticipate and expect as we're coming out of COVID and folks are really revamping their volunteer programs. There's a little bit of selection bias, of course, for everyone that is on the webinar today, right? You all obviously care about your volunteers in volunteer management. So let me stop sharing this and we'll continue. But thank you, everyone, for oh, now you can. Okay, perfect. All right, so I'll stop sharing. Okay, perfect. All right, and then as a quick reminder to everyone, please stay through until the end. We have a lot of content today, but we also have some freebies and sort of a nice surprise at the end for folks that stay on. We'll also have a recording of this webinar as well, and so no need to take too many copious notes, knowing that we'll share that with you all as at the end. But with that, we're going to dive into the state of volunteering. We have some really nice stats that Hunter is going to share fresh off the press from Little Green Light. Then I'll share some insights from our internal data from 2023. We'll dig into some best practices and then talk about the integration that we just launched. So in terms of the state of volunteerism, The last sort of census report showed that, there was $499 billion in donations. I think this is actually a little bit lower than the sort of the high water mark that was set previously. But still, just an incredible amount of generosity, for individual citizens, right, for us to be donating. And then in terms of volunteers, this is our estimate. There's no publicly published numbers today for 2023, but we estimate that roughly 74 to 78 million adults. It was 77 in 2019. And then, of course, as you noted, everyone, right, it seems like we've rebounded back to that level, if not grown a little bit beyond that. One of the really neat reports, if you haven't seen it, is the School of Public Policy by in Maryland, along with the Do Good Institute, had a great report that they published last year. They surveyed 1,200 nonprofit executives and 103 funders for this research. And a few of the things that they noted was that there's been this increase in demand for services. I'm sure many of you find that as not surprising news. But also, a decrease in staff and resources, right? At least in the past year, right? And so that can obviously put a lot of stress and challenge for folks. And then when they talked about volunteering, they saw that at least from 19 to 22, a lot of folks still said, actually more folks said they had a harder time finding volunteers during the workday, struggling to find the right volunteers with the needed skills. This could be actually, my perspective on that is that doesn't necessarily mean that you have fewer volunteers, right? But that because the need for your services have really increased, you need even more volunteers, right? And people are really trying to recruit for that. And so from Volunteer Pro, right, you'll see here they do a survey every year. And so in 2023, recruitment, no surprise, was the #1 pain point or issue that volunteer managers or volunteer coordinators cited as their biggest challenge, right? With time, unsurprisingly, be #2, right? The only time that was not true was during the midst of the pandemic, where supervision became a bigger point. So let me pause there. Yeah, I don't know, Hunter, do you have any reflections on any of the things that we just shared? Does that seem consistent with some of what you've seen?
Yeah, it'll be interesting looking at just looking at the poll results that we saw, it looked overwhelming that 2023, we saw higher volunteerism or volunteer entries for the people on this call anyway. That was kind of different than what I was expecting. So that is interesting.
Yeah, again, perhaps a little bit of selection bias.
It could be, yeah, yeah.
So the other great thing, though, I thought, despite all the challenges, is that this is a Google search for volunteering opportunities near me. I just ran this yesterday, and so you could see starting from 2018 until today, right? It's been around, this level, and then sort of really cratered. You can see this is probably March of 2020, right here, and then it's actually climbed up. And we're actually higher than it's ever been, right? So if you look at historically, versus 2019 or even 2018, right, we're actually at sort of a high watermark in terms of interest of people wanting to volunteer. And so I think that's really fantastic, right, as a signal for us. And so yeah, so I think the net takeaway is it seems like volunteering, we had a very strong dip, and then it's sort of rebounded very, pretty nicely. But we're going to share some stats and numbers with you all here. And so, yeah, I'll have Hunter here talk about some of the insights from Little Green Light.
Great, thank you. Just to interject one thing, I see a note, it says Bill Jones raised hand. Bill, maybe you could put a note in the chat if you have a question for us, and we can take a look at that there. Or maybe you were just supporting what Gung was talking about there. Yeah, this was interesting for us to look at volunteering in Little Green Light accounts. We hadn't really done a lot of analysis of that before, but working with Gung and thinking a lot more about how volunteering is tracked in Little Green Light and what you can do with that. It was really interesting to take a look at the accounts that are tracking volunteering. So we wanted to share that with you. I'll go to the next slide here. And you can probably place yourself somewhere on this pie chart. But about a third of our customers are tracking over 1,000 hours of volunteering in their database. And that's among the people that are tracking volunteering at all in Little Green Light. But about a third of them are tracking over 1,000 hours in the year, so 2023. 2/3 are tracking less than 1,000 hours, and about a third are tracking even less than 100 hours. So there's a lot of kind of casual use of the volunteering tracking in Little Green Light. It could be, on the smaller end, it could just be tracking board service. We know that some organizations use it to track board attendance or board participation in the volunteering. But certainly by the time you're getting up into the, over 100 hours, you're getting into some serious volunteer tracking, not to mention the 1,000 or the almost 9% of our customers that track volunteering are over 5,000 hours. So really getting into serious area. So this was just to kind of calibrate generally the breakout of our customer base. And then the next slide is about the 5-year trend. And this is limited to organizations that did track volunteering each of the 5 years. So a subset of our volunteer trackers who've been with us since 2019 and tracking volunteering each year. Clearly, you see the impact of the pandemic starting there in 2020, big drop. The two lines, by the way, the top line is the average and the bottom line is the median. I generally think median is helpful because that's kind of telling you the typical middle customer, where they at. The average is always skewed by those outlier type customers who are tracking, tens of thousands or, many tens of thousands of hours. That's going to pull up the average. So median to me is a nice place to look for the kind of typical. And you see of this group, they are typically tracking over 1,000 hours. So where that represented only the top 1/3 in the previous slide, it's here, the typical customer that's tracking year in and year out, they are tracking larger numbers here. There was a slight dip from 2022 to 2023. And that's what I was interested in, because on the survey that you all just filled out, your numbers generally were higher in 2023. That was pretty pronounced. So that could be a selection bias, like Gung said. We also, in Little Green Light, it's always dependent on what you're actually putting into the database. So that could be a factor as well.
Yep.
All right. And then I think there was one more slide here before we go on.
Did you?
Yeah, so
I think we had a quick poll we wanted to do.
Oh, okay.
Just learn a little bit more about you all too. And so let me. I think I got this one. Here we go. All right. So we're gonna do a new poll. Keep you guys engaged. Just 2 questions for this one. But basically, it's one of the interesting things for Little Green Light and Civic Champs in this partnership is really that relationship between volunteers and donors. And so we were curious, right, in terms of you all, right, do you generally ask your volunteers to donate financially or not? And then if you had an estimate, again, some of you might be not, maybe not tracking this. And if you're not sure, we actually have an option that says, I don't know, right? But, if you had an estimate for, what percentage of your volunteers donate financially, we were curious to see what folks' answers are. So, and perhaps maybe we'll cold call some folks or ask for some advice for those of you that are having more success, right? And sharing in chat, perhaps, maybe some of your strategies. So Yeah, it looks like we have 27, so 77% of folks have already, so we'll give folks another, 10, 15 seconds here to fill out the survey here. Thank you, everyone, of course, for participating, of course. This is always really helpful, like Hunter said, right? It's great for us as we're presenting to know where everyone else is at, so we can calibrate a little bit better. All righty. All right, we'll do a quick countdown of 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, ending poll. And I'll share results. All right, perfect. All right, so looks like about 20% of folks said they always ask. Half of folks say they sometimes will ask, and then there's about 30% who never ask, right? And so everyone has it'd be I'm always curious, right? So if folks have ideas or tips on why they lean one way or the other, we're always open to feel free to put that in chat. And then in terms of the percentage of volunteers who also donate to your organization, one person said none of them donate. And then we have a sort of a cluster here, sort of in that up to 30%, I would say it looks like 40% of folks, right, are in that 0 to 30% range. And then there's a little bit of a gap. And then we have some folks that cluster around, 10% of folks are in the 40 to 70% range. And then we have one person that has an 81%. And then about a little over a third of folks said, I don't know. Right. And so that's part of, I think, the power of maybe the integration is we'll have much better answers for that for folks. But yeah, if for our friend here at 80% or are the few folks that are 50 plus, if you have thoughts or ideas on how you've managed to have such strong overlaps, please feel free to share. Studies do show that we'll get into a little bit, but about 79% when you ask volunteers, they'll say that they donate back to the organizations they volunteer with. So let me stop sharing, and then we have one more slide, so we'll see what the data says from LGL.
Yeah, excellent. Well, this is really interesting looking at that combination of volunteering and donating, and that's really what we were trying to take a look at here. This is really just a sampling, so not meant to be a quantitative analysis, really just more qualitative, but getting a sense across 10 different accounts, all kind of on the higher end, so 1,000 hours or more tracked in the year. Just to get a sense of what some different organizations look like in terms of numbers of volunteers, and then the donations among those volunteers. So in that first circled number, that 23%, that's the average across this group of how many volunteers also donated based on the data that's tracked in little green light there. You can see the range. The highest looks like 46%. A couple of organizations were in the kind of the mid 40% range, but a lot in the kind of teen to 20% range as well. And then the other thing we looked at was the median donation amount among the donations coming from those volunteers compared to the donations coming from everybody else at the organization, all the other donors. So again, using median to knock out those really big donors who skew the averages. And the median among the volunteers was significantly higher at 195 for the year compared to the median of donations among all the other donors at 93. So it kind of supports the idea that combination of volunteering and contributing financially, that's kind of definitely something to strive for, kind of an awesome combination there. So tremendous supporters for the organization. Gang, do you want to add anything there, or we can move on to some of the Civic Champs insights as well?
Yeah, no, I think the thing that stood out for me the most, can you all hear me? I think.
Yeah, I
think
can
I'm
hear you.
yeah. Okay. Perfect. Was if you look actually across all 10, I know this is not quantitative, it's a little bit more qualitative, is that in almost every instance, there's no examples where you had lower donations, right? And so that's really interesting, right? So it's equal, significantly higher, equal. This is the one example where it was lower, and then everyone else was higher, right? So it's just not just at the average, but really across the board, you see generally
Right.
that's true. So
Yeah, that's a
um,
good point.
and then in terms of Civic Champs Insights, so you can think about this as folks that use a dedicated volunteer management software. In this case, specifically our software, but maybe perhaps this can be extrapolated to other folks too. And so when we looked at our system, what we see is folks are generally a little bit more volunteer centric. Again, selection bias for sure, right? For folks that will that have a system like ours. And so on average, we have in 2023, we saw 262 active volunteers per organization. This led to 6,689 hours volunteered per organization. And then that was a sort of if you converted those hours into a financial impact, based on what the Corporation for National Community Services estimates as $31.80 per hour, right? That means these volunteers generated over $200,000 on average of impact, right, for these organizations. And then when we looked at activities, so instances of volunteering, so on average we saw over 1,500 instances of volunteering. That was on average per volunteer per year. It was 5.8, or about 6 times. Your volunteers were going to volunteer with you for the year. About a 4.5 hour shift, so about a half day, right? It's the typical shift that you're seeing. And then 25 hours per volunteer per year for these organizations. So, really, I think, you could see the impact that volunteers can have with this, right? And so in summary, right, these are some of the numbers again. And then one of the other things that we did, I thought was really more interesting, perhaps, is really looking at 2022 to 2023. And so you're going to see the number of active volunteers actually grew, but not by a ton, right? And so you saw 1% growth. So it was a little bit, flat here. Number of hours went up from 22 to 23. These numbers are a little bit different from what you saw earlier, in part because we can only look at organizations that had both volunteers in 2022 and 23 with us. So as we're growing, we have a bigger data set, of course, every year. But looking at folks that were with us for both years, monetary impact actually grew, was about $9,000 increase. And then the activities per organization grew about 8% too, right? And I think another way to understand this is when you look at the activities per volunteer and the hours per volunteer, we're both up about 5%, 6 to 5%, right? And so for me, what that really says is, generally the organizations that we saw had a little bit higher in number of volunteers on average. But really what we saw even more was a increase in dedication from our volunteers. Right? And so each volunteer doing a little bit more than they were on average the year prior, even though, and then the, amount of time stayed roughly the same, slightly lower, but, statistically essentially, flat there. So hopefully that's helpful as you're sort of benchmarking, thinking about, where do you sit relative to your peers. This is, based on data between Little Green Light and us, hopefully providing some guidance on, hey, am I doing better than the average, worse than the average, right? Yeah, Hunter, any reflections on our data that as you're looking at it?
Well, it's pretty consistent. I mean, in your data anyway, year over year, pretty consistent. So probably pretty established volunteer programs that are in place. So that's definitely a professionally run organization that is up and running. They're not in the middle of a massive shift or change in how they're running their volunteering program.
Yeah, no, that is a great point, actually. So, sometimes I guess, we didn't show the slide. I should have put the slide on here, so I can only just talk to it, where you had the range of different folks.
Mm.
It was really interesting, actually. There was a pretty broad range in terms of both in size, but also in terms of their percentage change, right? And so sometimes the average kind of hides a little bit of that. But we definitely saw folks that had grown, 300%, in some areas, and then you had folks that maybe lost up to 80% of their volunteer hours. Um, and sometimes that's not necessarily, it's my understanding for those situations is often it's more macro based, right? So let's say you didn't really get, a big grant didn't come through for an organization, or they had a big project that they're sunsetting, right? And so we serve a lot of Habitat for Humanities as an example, and sometimes they do these build blitzes. And so one year they're building 10 homes, and in the year, the next year they're maintaining momentum, but it could easily drop 30-40%, right? Because you're
Mm.
like coming back to normal, right? And
Mhm.
so, but the average, right, is sometimes you lose some of that nuance without the anecdotal examples. So
Yeah. I like Rosa's question there in the chat box is a good segue to your next section, Gun.
yes, absolutely. Um, and so here, best practices. So we'll talk a little bit about, so there's 5 things we wanted to highlight. One of them, Rosa, is it's going to be around recruitment, right? And the verbiage that you might use. And so the 5 things that we'll dive into is one, talking about providing increased flexibility in your program, reimagining how you recruit, including the language you use, creating memories, capturing these moments and memories, and then our favorite, of course, leveraging technology. And so the first thing is, as people, especially as you're trying to regrow, or as you're thinking about this opportunity to restructure your volunteer programs, one of the things that we've really pushed folks is to provide your volunteers different ways to engage with you if you don't already have these options, right? A lot of times what we've seen is certain, it's especially if you have a high barrier to entry for your like mentoring, if you're dealing with kids, right? It can be hard to recruit because you ask for such a big time investment or training. But if you don't have a way for them to understand your mission before that, right? It's a very high barrier, as opposed to, are there opportunities for them to help out with an event, right? Can they be a guest speaker in a classroom in some way that's a little bit lower touch, lower commitment that allows them to help in different ways, right? Life situations always change, right? People become parents, they retire, etc. And so, are there other ways, right, that maybe they could do something at home in a hybrid role, right? Maybe they move, but they still want to support you in some way, right? Um, and then the last is, what we call micro volunteering. And so these are typically activities that require less than an hour, that allow you to stay engaged, or to sort of open up that funnel for recruiting volunteers, right? These could be anything from um, like signing a petition, doing something on social media to reshare, and then but you're giving them credit for those actions, right? Or it could be picking up groceries. It could be some activity that doesn't take a huge amount of time commitment, that allows them to stay engaged, right? The second thing, right, as we're talking about, Rosa, to your uh, point on using the verbiage, the thing that we really like to think about is 2 things. One is finding your ideal customer profile, right, and thinking about that persona. Um, it's often much easier to recruit for folks if you know who you're recruiting for, right? And the easiest way to find that is like your best volunteers. What do they do? how do they find you, right? Go and what I would say is go talk to them, ask them like, hey, thanks for coming. Like, how did you hear about us? Right? Why do you volunteer with us? And I think this is important because oftentimes we're when we're trying to recruit for folks, it's a very generic message, right? Like we need help. Anyone, willing to help. Here's all the stuff that, maybe we talk about the benefits of volunteerism. But if you know the very specific audience, right, then you can tailor where you reach out to, right? You can tailor the messaging to them using some of what matters most to them, right? And you'll just have a much higher rate of success, right? The second thing here is what we call language market fit. And again, this requires talking to your customers. I think I have a slide here as well. So the first one, right? So understanding personas. We have a worksheet. I won't dive into it. There's quite a bit here. But basically, if you follow the 7 steps here, list down your best volunteers, analyze, compile, identify, segment, and then you can, create this persona. But the second thing I'll spend a little bit more time on is talking to your volunteers to understand why they volunteer with you, but also what language they use when they describe your organization, when they describe why they volunteer, when they describe the volunteering experience or what they do. Because oftentimes we have our language that we use to describe our organization, the volunteering role, etc. But that may or may not align with how your volunteers actually think about it, especially the ones that are, quite good, right? And so if you can, again, borrow their language and right, and then when you're recruiting, you're going to have more success, right? Because you're actually going to be talking to folks in the language that they would themselves use, right? So hopefully that makes sense. And what we would do here, right, is you would draft some of these this new language or headlines, validate that people understand what you wrote. And then last, but this, number 4 is a little bit more optional, is, all nonprofits have free Google ads. One of the ways you can use it actually is to recruit for volunteers. And this is where you can use some data to say, hey, we use this language, and then we use this other, slight tweak on the words, and we got a bunch more clicks on A, less clicks on B, and so A must be, a better version of, what resonates with folks, right? And then, I think I answered the question from Rosa. So, but let us know if you have other questions here. And then the third thing out of 5 is creating memories. And I think this is something that everyone can do. And it's relatively simple, which is, if you think about when we have a tomato soup can here, because that's the example I'll use, which is, a lot of folks just had food drives, right? You saw food drives at your school, food drives at the church, food drives at the YMCA, right? And we, or toy drives, and people bring their stuff and they drop it in, and that's, we call it good. We all feel good. But what you could do as a slight tweak to that, for example, is ask people to bring in their favorite food, right? Or something that that has a memory associated with it. And then as folks bring in the food, let's say to a classroom, ask everyone to share their story about that item, right? And now it could be like, oh, I brought this in because like my grandma uses it to cook blah 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 and reminds me of Christmas, right? Or I brought this in because I love Oreos. Oreos are the best cookies ever, right? Whatever the story is, you've made it into this moment, this like it's slightly more emotionally charged moment that now when they think about donating, right, food or that this toy drive, right, they're going to also remember this kind of cool little moment that you've created for them, right? And so it's going to build just a stronger connection with your organization, right? It doesn't take a ton of work, right? You can just make these small little tweaks to your events that can create these moments for folks, right? And as you're creating these moments, why not capture them, right? I think we all have phones, right? And they all take great pictures and videos. My push for folks is to lower the bar in terms of the quality that you must have to upload or share, right? so that and really, I think the trick oftentimes is, let's say you're doing interviews with somebody, right? It's just to ask very pithy questions, right? So something that has a short, simple answer. So you have a very simple 30-second clip, right, that you can upload um, onto social media, or you can leverage in your newsletter, maybe even your thank yous, right? Like taking that group photo. Um, and the other thing, if you're using videos, that I think it's a great use, is you can think about all the different objections that a potential volunteer might have, right? Maybe they say, I don't have time, right? It's too far away. I don't feel like I'm qualified. And in the question, you can make them leading, leading questions, of course, right? And say, hey, hey Hunter, I want to take a quick video. Would you mind, of me interviewing you, asking you a quick question or two? And that question could be, Hunter, I know you were concerned about the time commitment to volunteer with us, but you've, found a way to make it work. What would you say to of somebody that's looking to volunteer and is worried about time commitment? Boom. And Hunter's like, oh yeah, I was worried, but it's no big deal. Like it's super easy, it's super flexible, da 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 da. And so you're addressing these potential objections upfront, right? And while highlighting sort of the story and the impact and all these other things. So hopefully that's helpful. Um, and then last but not least, of course, it's leveraging technology. Again, shout out to Chloe for the awesome graphic of LGL and Civic Chance powered together. Um, and so yeah, so we'll take a look at our integration here. So for folks that are interested in that. So first of all, for Civic Champs, for those of you that aren't familiar with us, of course, um, we are a volunteer management platform, and so we try to be there for every stage of that process, whether that's recruiting, onboarding, scheduling, right, collecting feedback and engaging folks, sending out emails, and helping you retain and reporting, of course. So I'll be relatively quick, but to give folks a sense, we have a pretty broad platform, with a kiosk, a mobile app, online calendar. And so what you're looking at here is just our mobile app. One of the things we do is we allow people to check in, right? 2 taps you saw there. They tap the check-in button. It says, are you here for this event? And, they're checked in. If folks don't remember to check out, it'll automatically check them out. And so trying to create this really easy user experience. Here you'll see when someone finishes for the day, they can leave feedback and indicate if they're happy or not. And I think this is really key for retention, right? So understanding who's happy, reaching out to people that might not have been happy. And if they were happy, right, you can ask them for a small dollar donation, and they can, sort of, you can broaden that donor pool right here, right off the bat. Right? And then, of course, with reporting, we bring all of this data back into reporting so you could see, right, those reflections, that feedback that folks might have. You could see every entry here is a instance of volunteering. So who did what, where, for how long. Okay? And the really exciting thing is you can also see, their volunteer profile with that same information, including their picture. You can have notes, you can have waivers, you could see those reflections that people have left, and then any questions or questionnaires that they've ever filled out for you, right? And so all of that, this information, right, including, this feedback, we also now share with Little Green Light. And so I'll have Hunter actually dive in and share what that looks like here in LGL.
Right. Yeah, so the idea is that all the volunteering entries that are getting recorded there in Civic Champs now will come over instantaneously to Little Green Light. That's really the big improvement to the integration that is launching at the end of this week. So we're kind of right on the cusp of that being live. And as those entries come in, they get recorded in Little Green Light by category. So the role that is assigned in Civic Champs comes into Little Green Light and sets the category here. And of course, every entry is recorded to the individual record as well. So on the constituent detail page, you see kind of the exact history of the interactions that you've had. And this is just so great, I think, to see this volunteering right alongside the financial giving. So the key idea in all of this is on the next slide here, yeah, that you can combine these two data points as you're doing your stewardship, as you're doing your fundraising drives and appeals, and collect, use both the volunteering history and the fundraising history. So one example would be to identify people who are high volunteers. In this case, they've contributed 5 hours or more, but they're a non-donor. So we're using the non-donor category in little green light there. And then the volunteering hours, you can add additional criteria if you want to look by a specific role or for a specific time period, you can always add that. So yeah, in this slide, this is kind of adding on to that. This is a report that I was looking at in a bunch of different accounts, is who do we have in our organization who is either a volunteer or they're a donor. So if you do a search in little green light, you probably know that you can combine two queries like this, and then the join there is the or, so you can find people who meet either criteria. If they meet both, then they'll definitely come through as well. And then on the next slide, we see what you can do with that kind of a search. In the report you build, you can report out what were the volunteer hours for each person, or what was the giving amount for each person. So you can really see side by side the combination of the volunteering contributed and the financial giving. If you want to apply that dollar value, I don't know if you use the same one that the Gung was sharing, the $31, per hour on average. You can apply that on your, you do that in Excel or something. If you need to break it out by category, you can do that in a report as well and get the total volunteer hours for a particular period just by category. But really just such rich data to use as you're stewarding your supporters. And, we always talk about ourselves as a donor management system, but really we're a supporter management system. And all that stewardship that you're doing, around the people that are contributing and supporting your organization in all kinds of different ways. We want to capture all of that and help you use that as you put together your kind of appeals and your fundraising plans and efforts. Now, that kind of was the payoff of getting all that data in here. To turn it on in little green light really couldn't be simpler. You have to click one button. So again, this is what we're launching. I think it's going to be on Friday or right at the end of the week. When you go to your Civic Champs area in your integration settings, there's that one blue button. That's all you need to do on the little green light side. That adds an ID field, which is specific to Civic Champs. So Civic Champs will be able to sync at the volunteer level that way. And then it adds the technology is using webhooks, but it's basically using a way that we can receive the data. So just that one button click will get your account set up for what you need on the little green light side. And then I'll throw it back over to Gung about the Civic Champs steps.
Yeah, yeah, and on once you enable that, there's going to be like a little snippet of not code, even just like a URL. You copy that and you paste it in sort of our integration page on Civic Champs, and then you're ready to go. And of course, throughout all this, we would help anyone with the setup if needed as well. So. And then in terms of wrapping up and some in terms of key learning takeaways from today. So hopefully folks were able to get a better understanding sort of the state of volunteerism, some of the latest trends from 2022 to and even sort of from COVID to today. We talked a little bit about best practices. We looked at how folks might be able to provide more flexibility in their volunteer opportunities. Understanding the language that's used by our volunteers to really play that back to them, making volunteering moments more emotionally connected, and then leveraging videos to speak to objections, right? And of course, finally, how you can use technology like Little Green Light and Civic Champs to superpower your donor and volunteer engagement. So we have some freebies, right? So we have templates here. We'll share the slides back out. There's hyperlinks here as well. And so you can you'll be able to get to these templates, and if you want to use that to help you fill things out. And then this is super exciting as well. Only for Little Green Light customers. From now until the end of March, we're going to offer a pretty fantastic deal for you all just to celebrate the launch of this integration. And so if you sign up between now and then, we have a 50% discount for a 1-year subscription to Civic Champs, or to sort of 1 year free for a 3-year subscription, right? Our pricing starts at $49 a month, essentially, and then sort of tiers up, based on your size, right? And so I think our most popular is 888 or 1188 for the year, and so you can, if you sort of divide that by 2, is the 1-year price, and then if you multiply that by 2 is the 3-year price, right? So hopefully that gives folks a little bit of a sense of pricing. And to redeem it, you can find time with me. There's a link here to book a demo or a group demo with us. We'd love to learn more about some of your organizations and get you all set up with this very, very cool integration that we just created. So
yeah, I was just going to add, and I should have mentioned this more at the beginning, but what we're so excited about with Civic Champs is the ability to schedule volunteering shifts and really manage that volunteer experience from kind of recruitment through sign up and beyond. Because we are often asked in Little Green Light, how can we use it for scheduling volunteers? And we don't really have a solution for that. So that's what we were excited to hear when Civic Champs was interested in working with us and creating this integration. We felt like that was a really nice add-on for Little Green Light, and something that our strong volunteer using organizations would be really interested in.
yeah. And I always tell everyone I talk to that, we have integrations with other folks, but I always say, for the biggest bang for your buck, you can't go wrong with Little Green Light. So you all are sort of getting the benefit of that, of course. All right, and then we have 2 more upcoming webinars, one next Wednesday, and then one the week after. So hopefully you liked today's topics. So I encourage, if you liked it, please sign up for the next 2 weeks. Next week, we're going to be covering how new volunteer coordinators can craft a vision for volunteer program success. And then the last week that we have here for just LGL customers is activating volunteers as donors, and sort of really diving deep on that topic with you all, right? Here is my contact information on the left. And then, and of course, you can reach Hunter here with his contact information here on the right. Feel free to reach out, or at least add me on LinkedIn as well. I'm always happy to connect with folks here in the nonprofit sector. All right, with that, I think that's a wrap for us today. Let me see if there's any additional questions. I think Stacy had a question. How do we track volunteer notes in LGL? Hunter, I don't know if you want to cover that.
Yeah, there is a note field for each activity, each time entry that you record. There's an open text field in Little Green Light for that. And with the integration, if there's feedback that came in through the Civic Champs app, then that will get passed through as well into that note field.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining today. Hopefully you all learned something. Really appreciate it, and looking forward to seeing many of you next week. So, all right, thanks everyone.